so go ahead.
My name is Thelma Zellen, Thelma. Z as in zebra, Elen.
Perfect. All yours, sir.
Now, how did your family come to Lancaster?
Okay, you asked me how it is that my family came to Lancaster. My father emigrated to this country in the early 1920s. Very soon he met my mother and they became engaged. He had an older sister living in Lancaster whose husband, Abraham Kaplan, had a dry goods store on North Queen Street. So my father came to Lancaster and got a job as a presser in a tailor shop, and he saved enough money so that eventually he could afford an apartment. He married my mother, and their first apartment was at the intersection of James Street and Prince.
What street did you live on in the Seventh Ward?
I lived on South Duke Street. When I was very little, our address was 451, and then when I was about 4 or 5 years old, we moved to 442.
Who were your neighbors?
My neighbors on the right were the Kimmel family, and on the left were the Dooneys. Across the street were my good friends, the Mishkins. And a little further to the left on South Duke Street, I was very friendly with a young girl by the name of Anna Gall.
Okay. Well, that's the next question. Who were your friends and buddies?
Oh, okay. My best girlfriends were Marcy Romanoff, Adele Hirschman, Betty Mishkin.
Okay. What schools did you attend?
Okay. My first 4 grades was the elementary school at the corner of Duke and Farnham. It no longer exists. I did 5th and 6th in George Washington Elementary, Edward Hand Junior High, and then McCaskey High School.
What class at McCaskey?
What class?
When did you graduate?
I graduated in 1946.
1946. What about the synagogue? Did you frequently attend the synagogue?
Okay, as a young child, I went to Hebrew school on Chester Street, and of course we would then go to services on Friday night and Saturday morning. But I had a run-in with the rabbi. We had a disagreement, and I stopped going when I was about the 5th or 6th grade.
What sort of things did you learn at the Hebrew school?
We learned to read and translate and write Hebrew, yes.
No.
Excuse me, Leroy, you gotta stop saying because you're getting into her conversation.
No, that'd be cut up.
When you're saying you're saying it before she's done talking.
What languages were any languages other than English spoken at home?
Yes, my parents spoke Yiddish, and it was very interesting. I didn't speak it, but I understood it. When my parents didn't want me to know what they were talking about, they would speak in Yiddish, but of course I knew what they were talking about.
What businesses or stores were near your home?
Well, of course, my father had the tailor shop, and on the corner on the left was Rosen's drugstore, where I had got my ice cream and my Cokes. To the right, catty corner, was a grocery store belonging to the Harrisons. And I remember on the corner was a gas station, and next to the gas station was a saloon. And then a little further, going toward Chester Street, was the Yaffe supermarket.
What activities were you involved in after school each day?
Okay, my major activity was the Glee Club, which I loved. In high school, my senior year, I was a student director of the class play, and I didn't do any athletics. I was not at all athletic, but I was involved in probably the yearbook or the newspaper. But the Glee Club was my number one love.
What about in the summer? What sort of activities did you do?
Okay, when I was 15 and a half, I had my first job Friday night and Saturday with a ladies' chain called the Darling Shop. Later on, I worked part-time for the Gibble Insurance Company. My last year, senior year, before I went to college, I worked in the steno pool at Armstrong, Cork, Linoleum, and then I went off to college. I also, one summer, was a daycare counselor for the day camp that the synagogue ran, the Jewish Community Center ran.
What about recreation? Where would you go for recreation? Did you go to
Oh,
the park?
we went to Long Park a lot, Brookside Swimming Pool, Maple Grove. I have a recollection that we would just hang out, maybe on the F&M campus or by the school's yards.
Now, you mentioned going to school. It was the Muhlenberg School. What about in McCaskey? College, where did you do your college?
Okay, in 1946, I went to Penn State, graduated February 1950. So 3.5 years at Penn State.
Graduate work?
I have done some graduate work at American University, but I did not complete the master's.
Do you have any difficulties getting a job as an adult?
When I graduated college, I was a journalism major. I went to the Lancaster New Era for a job. They said, Thelma, you're going to be married within a year. They were not interested in hiring me, so I went to New York to get a job, and not too long after that, I met the man I married.
So they were right.
Right. They were, the omens were positive.
Now, besides discrimination as a woman, did you encounter other types of discrimination?
Next to nothing. I think that what was remarkable growing up in the 7th Ward, we were certainly multicultural, but not only multicultural, but economically very diverse. But I cannot recall ever being the object of a racial or religious slur.
Okay. What impact did the major events of that period have on you? For example, Korea, Vietnam?
Okay. When I was in high school, I didn't know that I was going to go to college, so I was a commercial major, learning typing and shorthand, but I also took French. And the Dean of Women, Mrs. Myers, was very fond of me, and she called up Penn State and said, admit her. So I was admitted to Penn State.
What other teachers did you have a special relationship with?
The teacher that I most admired was in junior high. Her name was Anna Schroy, and she was the English and Latin teacher. And because of her, I developed a great fascination with words, especially their origin, and also what would be appropriate antonyms and synonyms. And to this day, I'm very fond of word puzzles.
I had Miss Roy also. What about, what were some of the leaders or role models that you look up to in the community?
Well, Miss Schroy was definitely a role model. I can't think specifically. I know that the family doctor, whose name was Shear, wanted me to go to medical school, and the head of the Jewish Community Center wanted me to go into social work, and community work, but I wasn't listening. I wasn't paying attention.
We've talked generally about the 7th Ward community. What are your recollections of the 7th Ward?
My recollection is that I was outside a lot on the front porch, the front steps, and everybody was very friendly. We greeted each other. I am not aware of any tension. And what was fascinating, people would come by to the tailor shop and hang out with my father. And some of the young men who were black actually could read Yiddish, and they would come in to read the newspapers, the Yiddish newspapers. And the other thing that I have a recollection is in the drawer of my father's sewing machine was a card. And I think in the 1930s, He was either a member of or donated money to the NAACP.
Do you remember the names of any of the men who would come to the shop to read the newspaper?
No, I wish I did.
This is very interesting. What did you like best about living in that community?
What I liked best about living on South Duke Street was its closeness to Center Square. I also liked the fact that if I took a walk in the opposite direction, in a very short time, going toward Rocky Springs, I was in farmland. I don't recall any traffic problems, and I never felt unsafe. And sometimes I'd be walking alone at night, but I was never worried.
Who were the doctors or dentists that you went to?
You know, on the same block that I lived in, there was a doctor and a dentist who were, I think, maybe from Jamaica. One was a doctor, the other was a dentist. They were very handsome men, and I went to them. My father said, "They're our customers, we're their customers."
Now, the entertainment, local parks and so forth, were they welcoming to Jewish members of the community?
In local,
The parks or
Oh,
the movie theaters?
I am not conscious. The only time I thought I was aware of discrimination was the fact that in high school, each year only one Jewish person would be elected to the National Honor Society. The senior year, it was I. Sumner was never voted in because he was black. That is my only awareness overt of discrimination.
What other contacts or friendships did you have in the African-American community? You mentioned Sumner Bowie.
Yes, Sumner was a friend, but on a day-by-day playing, most of my friends were just young Jewish girls.
Okay. What about the holidays, the Jewish holidays? What would you do?
Well,
What sort of activities?
my mother did a few things, but we were not very observant. For instance, even though she would change the dishes, we never had a Passover or Seder. And my parents would go to the synagogue only for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we were members of Degel Israel, but we were not involved.
The public school system, how did the school system involve you or get you in contact with?
I
other
loved
students?
school very much, and happily, I managed to be in the top percent in every grade, and I never resented doing homework. And I just thought that going to school and being involved in activities, it just filled my life. But I was also a very avid reader, especially things like mythology, and which turned out to be very good because when I would have English lit classes, I understood the references. The rest of the class didn't.
Now, you left Lancaster. About when did you leave?
I left Lancaster in the spring of 1950 because the New Era would not hire me. And I went to New York to get a job. And I did get a job. It wasn't a great job, but it was a job. But in July, 4th weekend, I was at Far Rockaway Beach. I met my husband. 2 months and 2 days later, we were married. He was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina. And I decided going back to the academic life would be more appealing than just being low paid in New York.
Tell us something about your academic life.
Okay. I married a person whose area was mathematical statistics. And in the early 1960s, he met people at the University of Wisconsin in the medical school who were having problems designing research. my husband thought that he could apply statistics and probability to solving the problems. So we left the University of Wisconsin and went to the National Cancer Institute. And he established the first of what we called a statistical laboratory to provide support services for biomedical research. My husband was very innovative, very successful, and in fact, the American Cancer Society awarded him a Medal of Honor. And a part of his activities is that we formed a nonprofit foundation in 1975, went active in 1976, and the foundation's purpose was to provide support services to carry out clinical trials, especially in cancer. I was itchy to do something, and so I became the manager of the first office with 6 people. The foundation ended up being very successful. It's still in existence. We're doing less in cancer now, but we're doing more support services in infectious diseases and HIV. So the foundation is now 43 years old and in the black. My husband unfortunately passed away 4.5 years ago. So, but I've been, my occupation has been a foundation bureaucrat for 43 years.
A successful one.
Yes.
Well, that's all the questions we have. Is there anything that,
Yeah, I got a couple, Leroy. Would you ask her to talk about her father and what countries they came from and how
Oh, yeah.
that happened?
tell us something about your,
Okay,
parents' background.
okay, very interestingly, my father's father and his siblings emigrated to this country. For some reason, my paternal grandfather went back to Poland. So that when my father came to this country in the early 1920s, he had relatives all over southeastern Pennsylvania, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and Lancaster. My father actually was in the Austrian army as a teenager in World War I, a special unit, which was fortunately, he was captured by the Italians. And he was sent to Italy where it was very warm, and the Italians were very nice, and he was out of it. He did not have to do a sacrifice, for the Kaiser. My mother came to this country from a village in Poland to marry a distant cousin that the family arranged. While she was en route, the cousin fell in love with another woman and married her. But not too long after that, my parents met, and they became engaged very quickly. I will be going to Poland in September to check out my mother's village.
now, how many of your family, it's a delicate question, how many of your family survived in Poland after?
Okay, my mother was one of 6, 4 girls and 2 boys. The 2 sons, one was killed before World War II. The second one was a Holocaust victim. One sister emigrated to this country. One sister and her family survived World War II because they were able to pass as Poles, and they spoke excellent German. And so they survived, and eventually that family emigrated to the United States. And the grandson of one of the sisters actually wrote a graphic novel, it's fiction, of what the Nazi occupation of my mother's village was like.
And what was the name of that book?
Is A Rose Blooms in the Desert, and the author is Alan Messing, and he and I have had an email exchange.
Excellent. Any other questions from the peanut gallery?
Would you tell us about your familiarity with Mort Rostowski, just like you repeated
Oh,
back?
what
in
the Rostowski?
Would you just talk about him a little bit as?
Well, very interesting. When I was a kid, we didn't have computers and television, so we were outside playing all the time. And Morty lived next door to my best girlfriend, Marcy Romanoff, and so we were outside playing all the time, hopscotch, jumping rope, whatever it was. We spent basically, what did we do at home? Sleep and eat. Otherwise, we were out playing.
And the Rostovsky family, you mentioned mentioned Morty was a little bit of an imp.
As a little kid, he was always getting into trouble. He was very mischievous.
What sort of trouble did he get into?
I don't know, just being sassy and you know, and negative. Little kids know everything is no, no, kind of thing. But I didn't know him real well. Most of my time was spent with his cousin Marcy.
Last night you told me a story about hearing black church singing. Would you talk about that?
Oh, one of the significant moments as a child, I was always attracted to vocal music. And what I liked to do, I was about the fifth grader at that point. I would go to the side streets and stand outside the black churches and listen to the singing, and I loved it. And I mentioned it to the rabbi one day, and he looked at me and he says, no. That next day, I stopped going to Hebrew school. I never went to Hebrew school again, and I forgot how to read and write Hebrew. That was my reaction to his dictum.
Now, which churches would you have gone
I can't remember, but there were churches. Let's see, it was North Street and I guess Locust on the left, but on the side street there were these small, black churches.
Ebenezer Baptist Church?
Yes,
was on
yes,
Locust.
and I just loved, even to this day, I love the music because, well, it's so rhythmic, and also all the songs tell a story.
The singing was good until I joined the choir.
Oh,
I sang in the choir at
absolutely.
Bethel.
I loved it. And you talked, did I ever have anyone that I considered a role model or I especially admired? Yes, Leontine Price.
Oh, yes.
And the first time I saw her, she was young and she was in her 20s, and the U.S. State Department put on a production of Porgy and Bess, and she was Bess with William Warfield. It was a special production that was sent to Russia. We saw it, but it was never shown on Broadway.
The Russian poet, what's his name, came to Millersville several years ago. He's the one who wrote the Babi Yar.
Oh, yes, yes.
He performed a poem. His good friend was Paul Robeson. And Robeson had gone to Russia in 1947.
I remember all about Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
And Showboat is one of my favorite musicals.
Yeah, Robeson had an unbelievable voice. Even
He
though
did.
wasn't trained.
He did. Absolutely, he did. And when you talk about, significant figures, I remember that Barney Ewell was a customer.
Yes, and what other memories do you have of Barney?
Not very much. My sister has more memories of Barney. And in fact, she'll tell you a story how she and he ran a race.
Oh.
Right. And he let her win. Right.
Just one final thing. You talked to me last night about men that hung out in your dad's tailor shop, and one of them was Leonard Wilson, a police officer. Would you tell
Yes,
me that story?
I can remember as a child a black police officer who visited us, frequently. And I told you I have a recollection of a black woman who was in jail for murdering her white lover, but every now and then they would let her out for the day and she would come visit us. And you knew something about that.
You said it, but you didn't say his name. Would you say that story over again about the black police officer, Leonard Wilson?
I
Oh,
can't.
that's your story.
Yeah,
Okay, forget it.
yeah. I don't think that was his name. It was someone else, but
No,
I can't
probably-
recall the
It
name.
would have been Earl Lavender.
That could be. The other thing is there were some blacks who could read Yiddish, and they would come to the store and read my father's Yiddish newspapers.
Well, Liz Ford,
Yes,
her father, James Ford,
yes,
apparently he could read Yiddish.
he could read
He
Yiddish.
may have been one of the ones that came to the shop.
Probably
But
so.
unfortunately, I can't ask him, he's no longer with us.
Probably so. But I'm a kid. There are people who come in and out, but I'm not paying a lot of attention to them.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you. That was fun.
I love talking